Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to see some folks who are sacrificing their lunch break or taking their lunch break to listen to three UNC alums and a student talk about some science policy fellowships. So as always, we're here with the Science Policy and Advocacy Group. My name is Rosa and I'm the Vice President. And it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce our speakers. So first up, we have Dr. Beka Van Hoeck, who is the 2023 or a 2023 NOAA Sea Grant Knauss Marine Policy Fellow. She's working as a policy analyst at NOAA headquarters in the Office of the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and the NOAA Administrator. And in this role, she manages a broad portfolio in support of the priorities of the NOAA Administrator, including advancing the new blue economy, building a climate-ready nation, and embedding equity in everything NOAA does. Beka earned her PhD in Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology from UNC Chapel Hill in 2022, quite a mouthful. And while she attended UNC, she served as co-chair of the ComSci-Con Triangle, a science communication conference, and as co-president of the Science Policy Advocacy Group. So yay, glad to see you back. And glad to see a SPAG alum in action. She was also a founding member of the NC Science Debate and an associate editor for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And some of you may know that we're doing the science policy memo competition again. So check the SPAG website or your emails for more deets on that. Dr. David Gorelick is a policy advisor in the Office of Canadian Affairs, Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the State Department. He supports transboundary water policy efforts between the US and Canada, and I am very jealous because that's where my research is. And before joining the State Department in 2023, David was a postdoc at the Center on Financial Risk and Environmental Systems here at UNC, my fellow lab mate, so I miss David. Dr. Gorelick was also appointed to the board of directors of the Orange Water and Sewer Authority, serving the town of Chapel Hill in 2022. And he is a triple Tar Heel. He earned his master's degree in 2017 and his PhD in 2021, but he was also an undergrad here. And since 2018, he's led 7 research publications and more than 30 presentations on water supply and financial risk management for US water providers. So he is steeped in water policy in the US. And last but not least, we have Manuel Galvan, who is a health policy research scholar with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. He grew up and worked as a public school science teacher in highly unequal Hispanic communities in Texas, so really knows science from the ground up. And his formative experiences with friends, family, and students instilled a lifelong pursuit to understand the causes of social problems in unequal environments and seek ways to address these issues. This is work that he's undertaking in his PhD research on how racial and economic inequality influences health, decision-making, self-perception, policy preferences, and beliefs about success and deservingness. He focuses on topics at the individual level and at the group level. Manuel aspires to inform evidence-based interventions and policy decisions with his research. So hopefully I've convinced you all that these are 3 folks that are highly qualified to speak about science policy and represent different science policy fellowships. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, maybe starting with Beka and then going to David and Manuel to just tell us a little bit more about yourselves and how you came across your fellowship and yeah, what it's like.
Thanks, Rosa. I'm happy to be here with you all today. I do have a bit of a cold, so I apologize if I'm coughing or a little raspy. But how did I learn about the fellowship? So as just a reminder, I am a Knauss Marine Policy Fellow. So my background is in marine science. And I first learned about this fellowship back when I was an undergrad, which I think is a little earlier than usual. I came across it while I was looking for grad school. And I also apologize if there's a lot of background noise. I live on a busy street in DC these days, and I'm at home, so there might be a lot of car noise that I can hear at least. But yeah, so while I was looking for grad schools, I kept talking to former lab alumni, other people in jobs that I was interested in having one day, and they all kept telling me, oh, I was a Knauss fellow. Oh, I did the Knauss fellowship. And so I just found that folks who were doing work related to the ocean, policy, kind of broader societal benefits as it relates to the ocean. A lot of them went through this fellowship. So I kind of set my sights on it early and gained policy experience to try to beef up my ability to compete for the fellowship. The fellowship itself it's stated as like an educational opportunity for anyone interested in coastal, ocean, and Great Lakes policy. The fellowship is run by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, but there are positions across the entire federal government in both the executive and the legislative branch. So you don't have to be a marine scientist. You can be a master's level, PhD level, or even a law student to be able to apply. And you just need an interest in these, natural resources policies and the people who benefit from the resources. And that allows you to apply for this 1-year fellowship based in DC. My fellowship itself, like my position, is in the office of the undersecretary. So NOAA is within the Secretary of Commerce, within the Department of Commerce. And so like the head of NOAA is the NOAA administrator, and he is an undersecretary. So I'm in his office. It's a little bit of a unique position because most of my team members are actually political appointees, where NOAA typically is run by career federal employees. But because it's in the executive branch, we have, the political aspect as well, pushing forward both, the priorities of the presidential administration, the Secretary of Commerce's priorities, and then our NOAA administrator's priorities. So my day-to-day right now changes every day. I'm doing a lot of what's called implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act money. So NOAA got $6 billion to spend over the next 5 years from these 2 laws. And it's all focused on like climate resilience, coastal resilience, building new technologies and supporting communities with actual on the ground conservation, restoration, implementation. And so I, at a really high level, meaning like I'm not in the nitty gritty of the science anymore. I'm in the really 30,000 foot level of implementing, how is this money going to get spent? Working with the NOAA career folks who are doing like the policy planning to help get their ideas in front of the Secretary of Commerce, the Department of Commerce for approval, ultimately in front of the White House and the Executive Office of the President for approval. So I'm really in these like mechanics of policies. How does like funding from a law get translated into policy? And then actually, how do we get that money out the door and doing the good work it's supposed to be doing? So it's in really the nitty gritties of program management. And then there's very fun kind of hot topics of the days, fires that you have to put out every day and week. And so there's the little bit of changing through there. The fellowship process, let me back up and kind of speak just briefly about kind of the application and the process of getting the fellowship. So you apply like a year before the fellowship started, and you apply through the state Sea Grant. So if you're not familiar, within NOAA, there's an organization called Sea Grant. There's a national one. There's also, I think, 34 state level Sea Grants across the country, who help kind of do research, fund grad students, and implement other, coastal related policy issues. And so you apply to them. There's, a project narrative, all the typical application things that you have to do. Why are you interested in science policy? What experience do you have? What has been your experience and commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, all of those values? And, how have you overcome a challenge? That's really, they separated out the application into kind of these focused questions, which was really nice. So you submit this application to your state Sea Grant. They select about 10 candidates to interview. And then after your interview, 6 candidates at the state level are able to be put up for the national competition. And so once you make it through that, Then your application is just read at the national level and ranked, and the list of finalists comes out. So kind of the timeline there, your application is due in February. You have your state level interview in March. You find out if you're going to the national level in April, and in June or July, you find out whether you got the fellowship, and the fellowship starts the following February. So I just started February 1st. I'm kind of still brand new in my position. That's just the very high level overview of the application. If there's questions, I'd be happy to get more into the details. The placement process, if I can, Rosa, tell me too if I'm running out of time. Just in how you get, that's how you get like the fellowship as a whole. But to get your actual position, I'll just say briefly, you had to choose either executive side or legislative. So I chose executive. And then you were given a list of all of the possible jobs you could have in the fellowship. And you got to pick somewhere between 15 and 20 that you want to interview for. And then we have a 3.5-day exhausting round of like 6 interviews a day, where you have 30-minute interviews with each of the positions you're interested in, which are all variable. Some were kind of very formal, some were very casual. At the end of that, you pick your top 3. And they tell your office like, oh, you're in their top 3. And then you rank all of the places you interviewed, and the host offices rank all of the candidates that they interviewed. And then we're matched in the exact same matching system that's used for like medical students and residencies, if that's, a helpful touch point. And so that is kind of the process. You're placed into your position. It generally works out. It kind of finds the best stable combination for everyone. And so I'm pretty happy with where I've landed. That was all very rambly. Looking forward to telling you guys more and answering any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you. That was perfect. Now let's pass it on to David. I think maybe had a similar matching process.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So I'll also do my best not to ramble, but that's not one of my best qualities. As Beka said, she's a Knauss Policy Fellow. I am a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. When it comes to science policy fellowships, I think the AAAS one comes up a lot. If you're unfamiliar with the acronym, it's the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. People say AAAS. I guess you could say AAS, but I don't know if you'd make a lot of friends that way. I found out about this fellowship coming to panels like this. So if that's why you're here, congrats, you've made it. And then I got hooked up with other groups. So Beka and I were co-presidents of SPAG at UNC some time ago. Those were the fun pandemic years. And that kind of finding out about the fellowships, it was just touching base with everybody who was interested in science policy in a grad school or even at an undergrad level. And there's so many. There's resources too. I think between the 4 of us, there's a spreadsheet somewhere we can find if you want to know about all the policy fellowships. But let me start, I think, where Beka kind of ended off with the process of the application, since we're there. It's also a pretty long process, and you can do the AAAS fellowship once you have your PhD in hand, or if you're an engineering student, once you have your master's and 3 years of experience. So it's open to everybody, including social scientists. The AAAS fellowship is meant to sort of span the whole broad width of moving scientists into policy at the federal level. And it starts in November. Your application's due in November. I would say it's kind of it's what you expect when you think of an application. It's people, you write a few essays about, why you want to do this, what your background is. You give a CV, you have some recommendations. The first step is, you want to tailor it to your science policy interests and focus, but in a lot of ways, it looks like an application as you would think of one. Then in February, people are notified if you are a semifinalist. At that point, it gets kind of fun in my experience, that semifinalists, you basically get a week or 10 days, and they say you need to write a 1-page memo about a topic you don't know about, and they'll give you a short list, and you sort of imagine you're writing this for your future boss if you were to work in government. Like, what sort of policy might you have in mind? What could you design? What could you contribute as a technical expert? And then you'll do an interview with AAAS staff or and some, I think, alumni often participate so that they can get a sense for you. And after that round, I think it's about a month later. So I think sometime this month, the next round of finalists should be selected. Once you're a finalist, then you sort of go into these interviews again. But this time it's with who your potential host office matches could be. So as Rosa said, I'm in the Office of Canadian Affairs. And that happened because I interviewed with them as one of the offices during finalist week. We sort of set up times where any office that we have mutual interests, where we would like to work there and they think our resumes are cool, we chat, we try to feel it out, and then eventually there's like a mutual ranking process. The people we interviewed with rank us, we rank those offices, and then there's magic involved, and at a certain point we all wind up at a place that we really like, at least in almost every case. And every year this means, I think our class was 200 people, which is kind of crazy to think there's that many fellows per year, but most of us go to the executive branch. And so that's what I'm talking about, is like what you think of as the government. That's going to be agencies like EPA, the State Department, other places like that. But then there's also one legislative fellow every year. So if you have like a judicial there's one judicial fellow every year. Sorry, I misspoke. So if you have an interest there, there is one spot for that. And there's a smaller number, but still a substantial amount of legislative fellows who will actually go and work in Congress. They'll sort of be attached to different congressional offices, and they'll interview with them the same kind of way I described my process. So there's a lot of ways through AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships that you can get involved. So all that to say, I wound up at the State Department. I did not ever think that would happen to me. I've never considered myself a diplomat, and I still don't. I've only been there 2 months though, so I have time. I started this January, and even though when you think of Canada, you think, they're our friends for the most part. And though we share diplomatic ties with everybody around the world, it does often kind of get forgotten that we only share a physical border with 2 countries. And so maintaining a friendly and productive relationship with our northern neighbor is really important. So that's what the State Department hopes to foster. And day to day, my job is to support the Department of State's Columbia River Treaty negotiator. And I assist her on any aspects of treaty negotiations and to help our office address transboundary water issues between the US and Canada. For a little background there, the Columbia River Treaty entered into force in 1964, so it's been about 60 years. It outlines how the US and Canada operate dams and reservoirs in the Pacific Northwest between British Columbia and Montana, Idaho, and Washington state. So it's meant to coordinate 2 things: flood control and hydropower generation. And so beginning in the 1990s, these countries started using the treaty to implement environmental operations too. So think about like salmon passage and fish ladders, things like that. And in September, some of the flood control provisions will change significantly. And so right now, there are negotiations on the future of the treaty regime. Unfortunately, I can't discuss the current negotiations with Canada. I would love to. It is fascinating, but it's important to maintain the confidentiality of that. And I will say it's been unlike any of the work I've ever done before in academia or as a postdoc, and I'm really lucky to be a part of it. If you want to know more about it, I can share press releases from both countries so you can see the different perspectives, which is fascinating in and of itself. But being a fellow at State and my current position, it's been an incredible opportunity to be in the room where it happens. And so in my case, that means I get to attend bilateral negotiations on this international policy. I meet with Congress to talk about these key issues. I prepare briefings, in some cases for the Secretary of State, in some cases for the President, about our progress. And I get to focus on, or I get to be, as someone with a background in water management and engineering, a technical bridge between the entities who implement the Columbia River Treaty. So that's the Bonneville Power Administration and the US Army Corps of Engineers, and take some of that technical stuff and move it into the diplomacy of negotiations. That's the value that I, in theory, bring, and I'm still working on that. But I would love to take questions and talk more along that, but I'll yield some of my time back, if I left any, for others who have more interesting experiences.
Thank you, David. And you both offered a really great perspective on fellowships for postgraduate studies, but Manuel has one currently as a PhD student that maybe is of more interest to the undergrads in the room or to the master's students.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It is very interesting hearing Rebecca and David, you talk about your experiences, because it is quite different than the thing I'm about to talk to, because mine is more about, it's a training fellowship, and so it's not more of like a placement in a nice role in a professional environment. It's more just getting me funding as a grad student. And so I'll just start there. Like, that is the thing that drove me towards this fellowship, is getting funding. My department does provide funding, as most, I think a lot of PhD programs in social psychology do. But I would have had to be a student, or I'm sorry, a TA or a TF, or I would have had to do a job basically on campus in order to get that funding. To avoid that, basically, I started looking at different funding opportunities. And the other thing, of course, is it looks good on your CV to have some kind of fellowship also. I think it's just a worthwhile endeavor, even if you feel like, oh, well, I want to teach classes. It's good to kind of see if there are opportunities you can take advantage of. I was somebody who came in with a master's degree. You cannot apply for NSF funding, which is really common in social psychology departments for people to apply for NSF funding. They don't accept applications from people who have master's degrees, just something to keep in mind. So I applied to the Ford Foundation, and I also applied to the Robert Wood Johnson's Foundation's Health Policy Research Scholars, which is what I'm going to focus on today, because that's the one I actually got. I was already working in a health lab. It's the Carolina Social Neuroscience and Health Lab. So I wanted to find a program that focused on health too. And so that's where the Health Policy Research Scholars really came into focus. And I appreciated that the program had this interest in bringing in students from what I'll call URM backgrounds, or underrepresented minority backgrounds. And so they bring together scholars that work on issues that are relevant to that group of people, and also like specifically try to get those people into the program. So they bring in about 40 full-time doctoral students in their second year into the program every year. And they try to find people, as I said, who are among the population of underrepresented minority students, or people who work on issues relevant to that group. And they kind of construe that group broadly. So we have first generation college graduates, individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, individuals from communities of color, and people from individuals with disabilities. So they have a very specific goal as an organization, which is to advance health and equity, and to bring innovation related to what they call the culture of health. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is. But it, in a nutshell, it just enables everyone in America to live longer, healthier lives, and bringing about the policy changes needed to make that happen. So what's cool about HPRS is they accept scholars from a really diverse array of disciplines. So there's people from economics, people from social science, people from psychology, architecture. We have a genetics person, transportation, sociology. Sorry, is my audio being weird? Oh, okay. So in addition to funding, they also provide a curriculum on leadership that is just meant to help us broaden the impact of our work and make change at the institutions that we work at. So this includes exercises in individual and collective leadership, applying research and interdisciplinary collaborative skills to engage with multiple different sectors. So working with policymakers, educators, business communities, just actual communities in the US or abroad, different institutions and agencies, so that we can translate the research that we're doing to advance that agenda of a culture of health. And so they teach us different strategies to to leverage the diverse group of people that we work with HPRS. And they really instill in us this, try to give us the skills to contribute to a national dialogue on policy change. And so there's a few different ways, of course, that you can do that. Because the program's so interdisciplinary, it isn't hard. There isn't a hard focus on doing policy analysis or policy work directly. I myself do kind of basic psychological research. I think the thing that they want you to do is find ways to translate your work if you can, but even if you just have the skills that come with being able to do scholarship, use that to make policy recommendations about topics that you're familiar with. So let me talk a little bit about what the application was like. So some fellowships, like NSF funding, are focused on funding an idea or line of research. So in those settings, your application is centered around your research experiences, your specific aims of your project, excuse me. And then it's kind of written as a grant. And so it's like, to the extent that you can write a really good grant, we will fund you. HBRS is not like that. HBRS is about funding you, the student, which they believe, if they believe that you will contribute to their overall mission. So therefore, the application has several distinct goals. One goal is basically trying to figure out, are you the kind of person they wish to fund? And so as I already said, there's this like demographic background component to the application. And so you talk a little bit about your background and how it relates to your interests and the stuff that you want to study. And it, again, can be related to your research interests. So one of those two components need to be communicated in the application. The other thing is, will you help them achieve their mission? As I said, they have this very straightforward mission of developing a culture of health. And what's nice is they helpfully kind of point you to several web pages that describe their programmatic goals, their framework, their action areas. And so you can read through all of that. They hyperlink it into the actual text of the questions that they ask you on the application. And so you can kind of mold your research interests and your background around these different programmatic goals that they have. And then just want to know, how are you going to make the most of their program? So there's two components there. One is thinking back to the past. How do your past experiences align with the mission that they have? But then they're also asking you to do forward thinking about how the training that they're going to provide you is going to help you achieve their programmatic goals. In terms of just the day-to-day of what being an HBRS scholar is like, I don't know if this is the greatest thing to say, but I will say that I don't think about HPRS all the time, or very often. Sometimes, some weeks it's just not on my radar, and then I'm circled back around to it because we meet every 2 weeks. So that's kind of the time commitment throughout the regular year. I'll say it's a fellowship that pays a little over $200K for 5 years of PhD education. And so that's just a thing that is happening in the background, but they don't micromanage me as a scholar. There's no expectation that I have like papers out that are about, culture of health specifically, and I can link it all back to their programmatic goals. They kind of made the agreement with me early on that whatever I was going to do, they thought it would be relevant to those goals, and they've set me free to do that. That being said, like I said, we meet every 2 weeks. We have kind of like an hour-and-a-half lecture / interactive talk series, that kind of thing. In the summer, we meet for a summer institute, which can be anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks in length. Historically, that's been in person. So they would fly us out to DC and maybe to Baltimore, because they're located at Johns Hopkins University. But during the pandemic, that moved to a shorter online intensive format. So it was like 3 or 4 days, just like back to back, being in a Zoom room for 8 hours, which, yeah, you can imagine how that is. But this last year, post, booster shots and vaccines, they did move back to in person. But there was still like someone who got sick at the time, and we all moved back into our hotel rooms anyway. So it's still a bit unsure exactly what's going to happen with the format going forward, especially for a group of people who's concerned about health and health equity. I think the skills that we've learned, so I think that's basically it for the program. I don't know if I could probably leave it there.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. And there are a couple of questions. I will ask a couple questions first, and then I'll move on to the participants. But please feel free to put them in the Q&A chat as well. The first question that I wanted to ask is just related to what you said, Manuel. What skills are you taking away? And David, Beka, together as well. And if you could also highlight maybe the science communication bit. All of you touched upon the need to translate your technical research to policymakers or political appointees, folks with different types of experience. So yeah, let us know, how hard is it? What tools and tips do you have for it?
Sure, I can go first. So I think there is some basic training and experience writing like a policy brief and collaborating with people from different areas of research to do the best version of a policy brief you can. In fact, they even flew us out to Washington, D.C. to meet with policymakers and advocate for a set of policies that were consistent with the evidence that we were familiar with as scholars. I think all of that has been super formative for me. I think one of the big things that I learned is that policymakers are hungry for that kind of engagement from scientists. And I thought it would be, I don't know, something more difficult, something more, there's like backroom conversations you have to get into the room or something. But really, you send an email to someone and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this or that. And you get connected with a staffer for Senator. So I met with a staffer for Senator Warnock's office, and it wasn't a hard thing to do. It was really just sending an email, getting a time slot, going there, talking to them for an hour. And then you feel like you're having an impact on that senator. And the other cool thing is that the more you do it, the more there's a relationship there. You're the person that they reach out to try to talk to. And just giving me that opportunity, I think, makes it so that wherever I land for my, if I'm a professor somewhere, that I'm just going to make it a point to reach out to the senators at the state level. And that seems like something that's possible now that I've had that experience. Yeah.
I guess I could take a second stab. Manuel, you reminded me to mention, and I should have the first time, when AAAS fellows come in, you come in as a GS-12 to the government. And that's GS is the general government pay scale. So you can look that up and you can see it's right there. What skills have I learned so far? I think, or what skills have I leveraged so far for my PhD? I would say patience is the first one that has come, especially in the State Department. The State Department is well known and well practiced in its bureaucracy, and that's a good thing. Let me try and explain. So where I'm in my office, which is in a bureau, which is in the State Department, and I have a boss. My boss has a deputy director in our office. Then there's a director. Then there's a deputy assistant secretary. Then there's a principal deputy assistant secretary. Then there's an assistant secretary. Then there's an undersecretary. Then there's a deputy secretary. And then there's the secretary. And then there's the president. So when I do something, not because it's not important, not because it doesn't need to go fast, but for the importance of deliberation and making sure that everyone is on the same page. When I do something and add my technical points or draft a memo or what have it, it goes to many sets of eyes. And depending on who in the end holds this piece of paper and uses the information on it, many more. And I think for me, I've really leaned on the good skill I picked up in master's and PhD, which was these processes are deliberate and they take time, and it's not a sort of immediate feedback on the effectiveness or the use of what you're going to produce, but there is, I think, some, at least for me, some peace of mind that what I am producing is going, it is explicitly put in motion so that it can be used for somebody to inform somebody who's going to make an important policy decision or take an action or take part in diplomacy. And that's been very important just from the position, and quickly learning the network of where I sit amongst all of these very important trees and pillars and different offices, that when I do something, I don't really get to act unilaterally for a good reason, the same way I have before. And if you prefer a little bit more independence, perhaps the State Department is not your shtick. But I've found a nice niche there, and I kind of like it. But I think other parts of government sort of go through the same thing, but we certainly, we're well known for wearing our suits and things. And as you can tell, I'm not really a suit guy most of the time. I am today, but there's no baseball caps for me when I go to the office. Maybe one day when I become secretary, I can wear a baseball cap, but until then, I don't know.
I can touch on that just briefly too. So I'm only a month into my position. So I think like what skills I've gained, I'm still in like the learning process of like what my job is. And so really I'm learning like how does policy go from words on a page to projects on the ground? I think like my skills gaining is really just a better understanding of what policy means and how does the federal government do it. And so I think that's really what I'm learning, the skills I'm gaining so far. It's just a better understanding of the mechanics of science policy. When it comes to skills from my degree that have been useful, really the project management. You know, when you are in school, when you're in grad school, you have multiple projects going on at the same time. You maybe have other extracurriculars. You know, you're managing the workflow of multiple different things. And those skills are still very useful. I'm just not doing, you know, I'm not coding. I'm not doing data analysis anymore. So it's different projects, but I'm still managing the workflows. You know, lots of writing and synthesizing broad ideas. Again, it's not scientific and technical. So different content, but same soft skill of like taking the nitty gritty details and making it one sentence. How do you take 7 pages and make it one sentence? And then lastly, kind of managing up and just like communication. You know, when you're in grad school, you have to reach out to your committee. You're constantly talking to people who are higher ranking than you. And so, you know, how do you handle tension in those interactions? How do you balance creating like an enjoyable work environment with also like the necessary respect? I think there's a lot of like kind of people put on a facade of importance in the federal government sometimes. And so you have to be a little bit careful treading around egos. And so, you know, managing kind of those interpersonal skills is certainly something that's relevant. In my office, we do a lot of like, we're the go-between between the like subject matter experts within NOAA and the Department of Commerce. And so we're doing a lot of communication both with the subject matter experts and then up to the department. So yeah, all of those soft skills still super relevant.
That's awesome. And yeah, I think time management is one of those things at fellowship or otherwise is really important to learn, whether it's an undergrad or in grad school. So that was great. I know Stephanie Cleland had her hand up, so I'm going to unmute her and let her ask her question.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. I guess the question I had is kind of transitioning from an academic setting into a more policy relevant setting. What surprised you the most? Because I feel like, you know, you can kind of have an idea of what to expect and what's going to happen, but I think it's also good to have an idea of, well, you know, what's most surprising or what was least expected about the kind of the transition into a different setting.
I can take a quick stab at that. This is maybe a lighthearted answer, but I think we joke in like, you know, the higher you go, the more meetings you have. And, you know, we always like, oh, meetings are such a waste, like what a pain. And I think in grad school meetings are frequently, you know, frustrating. You're like, we could just email about this, or like, let's, you know, like, I'm just going to get the work done. But I really realized how much work is actually happening in meetings. Like it is those casual conversations that we're having with varying groups of people that are like rolling the ball forward. And so, you know, I sit in meetings for 5 hours a day sometimes. But it's pushing it forward. Like what I talk about in one meeting, I'm taking to the next meeting, and we're making new decisions based on what was agreed upon in the meeting before it. And so, yeah, how much just happens through conversation and then going back to a document. So there's a written record of something. But yeah, I found that kind of surprising because I thought I hated meetings, but they're very useful.
I will say bravo to that. And this is the first of 6 straight hours of Zoom I have today. That's a little bit of an outlier, but to Beka's point, where in grad school, I think I used to lament some of the meetings I had to be in for their value. I do not feel that way in my role now, that everybody I'm talking to, and they're almost always entirely people more important and more decisive than I am, having them all in the same room gets a lot of things done very fast, even if it's a virtual room. And for the amount of emails I know that they all get within an hour, it's no small feat that we're able to come out with, you know, a single, like a comfortable well-defined agreed position. Sometimes that's the goal of these meetings, and it could be 4 days of emails, or it could be 15 minutes of conversation. And I'm very thankful for that, because when we do get to talk, it ends up making my life much easier, because in my role at this point, 2 months in, I spend less time using my background expertise as I do making sure everybody is on the same page with things. And as far as, I mean, and that's very logistical. So I think I've been surprised in that way by, I think how fast it was to sort of fit in and just get used to the regular role of the day-to-day life. You know, I did not walk in the door and they said, I need you to tell me like the most important thing about water management here now, like right now. And if you don't, you're fired. Like that, it was not, I was not just like a brain on a shelf that they squeezed when they needed like smart juice. Like I am here to not, you know, to be part of the office, to make things run, to do sometimes or a lot of times the dirty work. And eventually, as I know the processes and I can't do damage by accident of emailing the wrong person or forgetting to email the right person, then I can be valuable. But at first it was like fitting in has been more seamless and less hectic than I expected, even though maybe I just explained it in a way that did not feel that way.
Does that answer your question, Stephanie?
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Awesome. So all three of you have talked a little bit about this, getting to know who to talk to, talking to them in meetings, reaching out to a senator or representative. That's really intimidating, I think. So what are your pieces of advice? How do you initiate? What should you reach out about? What are people interested in hearing? Is it like a local issue, a broader issue? What's been your experience?
Sorry, Rosa, can you repeat that question? I fritzed out a little.
It's okay. What's been your experience on, or what are your tips for reaching out to people that maybe are higher up on the food chain than you? What topics, or how do you engage them? What topics maybe should you start from?
Okay, I'll go first and fast. My method is reckless abandonment emails, and it works. And it goes without saying, all of you who are here now, even if we've never met, you could, like, if you want to know about the fellowship or what I do or whatever, you could just email me, just text me. It's whatever. I am your contact now. That's how it works. And that's what I do. It does help a lot. And it was told to me before starting a fellowship that once you become a fellow, or, you know, I think for all of us in all of our different spheres, once you have that next to your name and you can put it on the bottom of emails, people will answer you, and people who, you know, I would never expect to read my email before. And that's gone a long way. I am just, you know, trying to meet with anybody I can. And a lot of times it just happens serendipitously. I think that's the nature of networking, or whatever you want to call it. I try not to think of it so much like that. I just like meeting people. And that's worked out. So I highly recommend, you know, you just get in touch with people, tell them who you are, tell them what you're about, tell them what you want to do, and ask them about them. And once you do that, their brains start going, and people love to talk about themselves, myself included. And so once you get started, you know, the neurons fire and people think of people that you might be interested in, and it kind of goes from there.
I can also just add on, like, when it comes to, you know, potentially reaching out to your member of Congress or something like that, do it with other people. Don't feel like you have to do it alone. You know, find folks who have common interests to you that are, you know, relevant to something going on in the state. So if it's something in North Carolina that, like, you know, Manuel has a health policy background, like there's a ton in North Carolina to talk about with that. And the senators and representatives, they want to talk to you about it. They want to know if you have expertise in it, like you can share what you know. If you have an opinion that you want to share, like that's what they're there for. But don't feel like you have to do it alone. There's also trainings out there, and SPAG can even provide those trainings or give you resources. So reach out to people who know what to do if it's your first time, and then, you know, take others with you, because it's a lot less intimidating when you know, have friends to share it with or to laugh about it with if it goes terribly wrong, which I'm sure it won't.
Yeah, I'll just say most of my experience here has been in the academic setting. And so reaching out to professors or reaching out to somebody who's in the field, but I don't know personally, and just trying to ask them a question, cold email kind of. I really try to do everything I can to make it so that I'm not wasting their time or they don't feel like I'm wasting their time. So I think a lot of that is like saying things succinctly. If I'm in a meeting with somebody, having an agenda every time that I arrive to make sure that like, and this is very basic. So if it's valuable for anybody, it's not the kind of like nice wisdom that you get from two people who already have jobs. But yeah, always being prepared, always like instead of saying when can you meet, providing times so that they can use those to kind of guide their decision making, things like that. Anything you can do to ease the difficulty and activation energy for somebody to respond to you in a kind way and to help you out.
My last thing was best advice I ever got. I think this is true for emailing Congress or just regular networking. People only read the first 2 sentences of any email you send, especially if they don't know you. So keep it quick. If you want a meeting, you better say that. Don't put it in the 3rd paragraph.
Those are all great.
I have a 3rd paragraph. Sorry.
That's true. If your email's more than 1 paragraph long, may not get read. That was great. And I asked that because I think it really helps to do that outreach when you are preparing to apply for a fellowship or to take full advantage of the fellowship. But I wanted to shift gears a little bit because I think the road to every fellowship or scholarship is paved with failure. And well, maybe not for you all, but I know for everything I've received, I've certainly completed applications and not received a fellowship or scholarship. For anyone who does fall in that category, would you be able to talk about maybe a rejection you've gotten and anything you've learned from that experience?
I can share one that comes to mind quick. So when I was in grad school, I applied for research funding through it's called like the Population Dynamics Graduate Research Fellowship or something. And I had what I thought was a really cool and important project that was relevant. But they only give 6 of them, and my methodology was a little more unique, a little more outside the box than like the typical fisheries science methodology, and so I didn't get it. And I was bummed. It was like 3 years of funding. It would have been really incredible. I was able to get funding elsewhere, which was great. So it ended up being okay that I did not get this fellowship, but it certainly stung when I didn't get it. And now as a Knauss fellow, where I push, a lot of my efforts into science policy, knowing I wanted to go into science policy, I gained a lot of extracurricular experience in that space to be competitive for the fellowship I have now. I just got an email last week for the opportunity to be a reviewer for the Population Dynamics Fellowship. And so I applied to do it. I haven't heard back yet, but there's a very good chance that in just 2 months, I will be one of the people, with a PhD after my name, reviewing and helping to decide which graduate students get that fellowship that I did not get, 5 years ago. And so there are many paths to where you want to go. And so just because one fellowship doesn't work out doesn't mean you're not going to get where you want to go. There's incredible opportunity out there. You just have to keep pushing for it sometimes.
Yeah, let's see. I was thinking of a couple while we were there. If I'm talking to mostly grad students, the story might sound familiar. I applied twice for the Graduate Research Fellowship program with NSF. Twice did not get that. And usually the first time it was something like, I can't believe you didn't publish 3 articles when you were an undergrad. And I remember reading those comments and being like, this is, I don't know how I'm supposed to be like the person that they're looking for. And I remember being very frustrated at first. And that was early in grad school for me, and definitely challenging times when I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. I didn't feel like I was an employable person yet. And that that got me, it sort of, it set me back at first, and then I realized, life goes on, and I think in the same way Beka did it, when I identified science policy as something I'd like to go into, I was a lot more, I had a lot more drive to go after the extracurricular work and start to build up the other pieces of my resume that I thought would help, and not get too deterred by not getting a little thing here, a little thing there. And I've applied to, many things and gotten none of them. And it just happens. I think the more of them I did, the less sensitive I got to losing them. So I guess that's one piece of advice. I know everybody here is worthy of an award and a fellowship. And if you don't get it, you don't get it. Sometimes the reviewers wake up and they're pissed off, and that just sucks. But objectivity in a lot of these things is difficult to come by when there's thousands of applications and 30 poor people who've been voluntold to review them all.
Manuel, any concluding thoughts for you?
I mean, yeah, I definitely have not gotten a lot of things. I think persistence has been the thing that has got me to where I am now. I graduated, this just will show you what I mean. I graduated undergrad in 2011, and I'm a fourth year grad student now in 2023. So I applied to PhD programs 3 different times, 3 different years, and only got into programs that I really wanted in my final year. So I think if in some ways that's not a positive story. I think most people don't want to wait that long to get where they're going. But I think if you're persistent and you keep going, people will eventually notice and give you the shot that you want. The reason why I was hesitant to say that in this context is because sometimes there's just short timelines. Grad school is one of those times where you really just you can only apply for HPRS once, for example. And but I think to David and Rebecca's points, if you don't get one thing, go for the next thing. And there are lots of alternatives. And so don't get stuck on one thing. Something I've heard is invest in the process, not in the outcome. So the process of applying and learning and developing your CV and progressing is the thing you need to be invested in. And whether you achieve this particular thing that you had your mindset on is a disappointment, but otherwise you kind of just need to accept that was a loss and then move on to the next thing that you can set your sights on. So
that was all really good advice and also excellent examples. I think it's all too easy to forget that there are failures and there are rejections on the way to any successful application. But as a closing question for all 3 of you, I know, Rebecca, your fellowship is 1 year. Manuel, you're approaching graduation at some point. You're starting to think about that. David, AAAS is also short term. What's next? What do you all want to do?
That's a great question. 1 month in, I'm both saying, wow, my fellowship just started, and also it's going to go by so fast. I need to be thinking about what's next. My big picture goal is to stay in DC, doing something in marine policy. I would love that to be related to habitat conservation, offshore wind energy, fisheries topics. And so for me, that means trying to get a job at NOAA, at the agency I'm currently at, but at a different position within the organization itself. I am missing science a little bit. I'm only a month in, so my last 6 years of my life is very different from the last month. And so I'm hoping that my next position puts me a little bit back more in the middle between science and policy. And there was two other closing thoughts I had to say. they're escaping me. But one of them, this is a throwback way back to earlier in the conversation. My fellowship pays $66,500. I think it's important to be transparent. That's what the applicant, like that's the fellowship stipend provided. But yeah, where do I want to go next? Oh, I'm less worried about like where it actually am next, is more like who I'm working with. People keep telling me I need to network left and right, network while I'm sleeping, which is new to me. But yeah, so I'm really finding though that like what you're working on can be less important than the people you're working with. So just hoping to find a good team to do, important work related to marine conservation.
Let's see. So where do I want to go next? It's a good question. I'm not sure how fast I'll get there. I started my fellowship a little late. And so last month, after, a month and a half, my office was like, hey, do you want to stay for your second year? And so I said, yes, have a little bit more time, which is great. But after that, no clue. Government so far has been very interesting and rewarding for me, and educational. I've definitely kept, being able to learn and try new things and be a part of new and exciting things. It was a huge draw to science policy and the fellowship for me. And I haven't been disappointed yet. Like Beka, there are aspects of science that I miss. I think I do to some extent miss the independence of exploring questions, and being able to spend a lot of time on the nitty gritty of something. That's just not the nature of what I'm doing. Not to say that you can't find that in the federal government, but I think maybe not in the State Department. But I think no matter for all of us after all these fellowships, I don't think I'd be too out of pocket saying that we're all set up to have very wide potential career paths after this. I don't think any of us are locked in any one way to what we could do or what we could be. And that was another big reason I wanted to try and take this path. And so far, so good. But yeah, email me in a year and a half and ask me if I still feel that way. If I just send you a panicked email that I don't have a job yet, well, maybe, things are different.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where I am going to end up, I think it's the situation a lot of grad students, I think, find themselves in, where you can be as selective or open as you want. And the more open you are, the more opportunities are in front of you potentially. And the more selective you are, the more you are kind of boxed in to specific geographic regions or maybe specific careers. In social psychology, there tends to be more people applying for jobs than there are jobs. It's become very much the norm to apply for postdoc positions, and there's like no way you're going to jump straight to a faculty position for a lot of folks unless you have a really, really impressive CV. And I've even seen people who have very impressive CVs still do postdocs for a year or two. So I am keeping my mind open to leaving academia, although that's my first choice is to stay in academia. And then move to nonprofit would be my preference, but there's lots of folks in our department who go to work at Facebook or to work at wherever and make lots of money. So I think the world is my oyster. I think it would be fantastic, and I've said this to a few people, it would be fantastic if Vox with a V, Vox, picked me up as a science communicator for their YouTube channel. You know what I mean? Like that would just blow my mind. It would be a fantastic shift in my career, but I don't see that happening. But I'm just saying like that, something like that would be really, really cool. But I think
you gotta dream big.
Yeah.
Right?
It's quite the fantasy.
Well, that's okay. That's how things happen, right? That's the first step. And Manuel, I don't want to cut you off because it sounds like you have big ambitions, and it's exciting to hear how passionate you are. I am cognizant that we are on the hour and David has 5 more hours of Zoom meetings to get to. So I just really wanted to thank you all. I think you've all kind of volunteered to be resources for students who are interested in SPAG members. So reach out if you all want to connect with any of our panelists. And just the last few announcements I'll leave you with. Thanks again to SPAG for being a platform, to TIBS for providing some funding for our Spring Policy Certificate Series. Stay on the lookout for future events, which include some of those how-to skills. So talking to legislators, for example, at the end of April is going to be coming up quick. And do make sure you fill out the attendance tracker, both for credit for the Science Policy Certificate Series and for Campus Life Experience, if that's something you are interested in. And with that, big round of applause for all our panelists. Thank you again, and see you at our next event.